In tonight's news edition, His Majesty the King honors a civil defense officer for his bravery in rescuing 2 Iraqi children swept away at the Dead Sea. Warplanes of the Saudi-led coalition continue striking Houthi targets in different parts of Yemen. And the foreign ministers of Iran and 6 world powers struggle in a final push for a preliminary nuclear accord less than 2 days before their deadline. You're watching Jordan TV. Very warm welcome to the news. His Majesty the King, the Supreme Commander of the Armed Forces, honored a civil defense officer for his bravery in rescuing 2 Iraqi children. Sergeant Omar Falah al-Balawni of the Civil Defense Department received the Order of Dedication and Sacrifice in recognition of his courage for having rescued the Iraqi children who were swept away by strong waves from the Dead Sea beach on Friday. In a ceremony attended by Civil Defense Department Director General Lieutenant General Talal al-Kufahi, King Abdullah ordered the promotion al-Balawni from sergeant to warrant officer. Upon receiving Balawni, his parents and the Iraqi children and their mother at Al Husseiniya Palace, His Majesty expressed pride in the heroism and sacrifice Balawni had displayed in line of duty to secure the safety and security of the sons and daughters of the country and its guests. While on duty at the Civil Defense Department's Dead Sea Center, Balawni answered a distress call by the Iraqi mother that her children Maryam, 13 years old, and Maher, 11, were pulled away to the sea after a windstorm suddenly erupted on Friday. He remained in the sea for around 12 hours, 17 kilometers away from the shore in the middle of the rough seas, until rescue boats reached them and managed to bring them back safe to the beach. His Majesty the King and Iraqi Vice President Osama al-Nujayfi discussed ties and developments in the region. King Abdullah told the senior Iraqi official that Jordan is interested in further cementing ties with Iraq, the kingdom's major trading partner. He reiterated Jordan's support of its neighbor in its endeavors to restore security and stability in the country and achieve reconciliation among Iraqis. The meeting also dealt with regional and international efforts to combat terrorism and ward off the threat of terrorist gangs and extremist ideology. King Abdullah spoke of the need to support the Iraqi government's resolve to deal with terrorism, which threatens the security and stability of the entire region. The Iraqi Vice President said Baghdad appreciated the King's support and his tireless efforts to bring about peace and security in the region. Saudi Arabia and it's said it is open to host a meeting of all Yemeni political parties who are willing to preserve Yemen's security and stability. The statement quoted King Salman bin Abdulaziz as saying in a cabinet meeting that such a meeting must be held under the umbrella of the Gulf Cooperation Council in the framework of preserving legitimacy in Yemen. Meantime, Pakistan said it will send troops to Saudi Arabia to join the coalition fighting the Yemeni Houthi rebels. Coalition warplanes have continued striking Houthi targets in different parts of Yemen. Here's more.
For the 5th day in a row, the Saudi-led coalition of Arab forces continued pounding the Iran-backed Houthi militia and allied military units in Yemen. Airstrikes and warships targeted and shelled Houthi fighters advancing southward toward the southern port city of Aden, the last bastion of President Abd Rabbu Mansour Hadi. The vessels were believed to be Egyptian warships that sailed last week through the Suez Canal toward the Gulf of Aden. In the capital Sana'a, controlled by the Houthis, jets struck around the presidential palace next to the diplomatic quarter, as well as a weapons depot in the Nugum mountain overlooking the capital. Yemen's Foreign Minister Riyad Yassin denied any link to Saudi-led military operations for an airstrike on a camp that left dozens dead. A Saudi military spokesman said the kingdom was seeking clarification on the incident, but the Yemeni minister blamed Houthi fighters for the attack.
This is really untrue. They are always trying to have what is called a human shield. Houthis, they are going to places where there is some population or residential houses, and they are trying to put their weapons there. Sometimes also they use, when there is some airplanes coming, they are hitting the residential places or refugee camp or whatever in order to blame the airplanes coming from above.
Yassin also said the Yemeni government had no contact with Houthi militias since the start of coalition airstrikes last Thursday. Speaking at the Arab Summit in Egypt earlier, Yemen's president described the Houthi movement as Iran's puppet and accused it of destroying Yemen through what he called its political immaturity. Loy Balkar for the news at 10.
The U.S. State Department said Iran would not necessarily have to ship its stockpile of highly enriched uranium abroad under a nuclear pact with major powers. The foreign ministers of Iran and 6 world powers were meeting in a final push for a preliminary nuclear accord less than 2 days before their deadline. Officials at the talks in the Swiss city of Lausanne said attempts to reach a framework accord could yet fall apart. One diplomat said there are 3 major sticking points that must be resolved if Iran and major powers are to secure a framework deal before a self-imposed end of March deadline. The diplomat said the most difficult issues were related to the duration of any limits on Iranian enrichment and research and development activities after an initial 10 years, the lifting of UN sanctions and restoring them in case of non-compliance by Tehran. The P5+1 have been seeking to break an impasse in negotiations aimed at stopping Tehran having the capacity to develop a nuclear bomb. In return, Iran will have an easing of international sanctions that are crippling its economy. In other news now, Palestinian protesters clashed with Israeli soldiers during rallies commemorating the 39th anniversary of Land Day. Some 200 protesters at Hawara checkpoint near the West Bank city of Nablus threw stones at Israeli forces, who replied with stun grenades and tear gas. Palestinians said several protesters were hurt from smoke inhalation. Protests also broke out in the city of Ramallah. In Jerusalem, a group of protesters clashed with Israeli police near the old city's Damascus Gate. Land Day is the day Palestinians commemorate the killing of 6 Arab citizens of Israel by Israeli security forces during protests in 1976 over government land confiscations in northern Israel. Head of the Jerusalem Center for Social and Economic Rights, Ziad al-Hamouri, said the Land Day demonstrations are the Palestinians' way of expressing their strong relationship with their land.
It shows all over the world that the Palestinians are connected to their land and they will not, forget their land. This is one of the ways to show this relationship with the land.
UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon expressed concern over alleged abuses by Iraqi pro-government forces in the war against Daesh militants. Speaking during a visit to Baghdad, the UN chief called for investigations into any wrongdoing. Ban said actions committed by Daesh against Iraq's religious minorities and massacres of soldiers and executions of civilians did not justify any similar action by the pro-government fighters. Speaking alongside Iraqi Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi, the head of the United Nations called for different volunteer armed groups, a broad term referring to Shiite paramilitary factions, to be brought under government control. The Iraqi Prime Minister said anyone who committed human rights violations should be brought to justice.
The Iraqi government is committed to respecting human rights all over Iraq and is treating all people equally and does not differentiate. The Iraqi government has issued strict measures in dealing with violations of human rights by the security forces, and there are strict instructions in this regard.
Residents in the Syrian city of Idlib rejoiced in the streets and prisoners kissed their liberators as they were released after Daesh group seized the northern city. Media sources reported that rebel forces and Idlib residents celebrated the capture of the city from Syrian government control. Another source said the Ahrar al-Sham fighters freed dozens of men from an Idlib prison. The monitoring group, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, said 53 prisoners were released by the insurgents, including 2 women. Also coming up, women in the northern Jordan Valley speak to the Queen on their business success stories. And the co-pilot of the crashed German wings plane had been treated for suicidal tendencies, according to investigators. This and more after a short break. His Majesty the King welcomed a delegation of U.S. senators led by Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell to discuss Jordanian-U.S. ties and regional and international issues. King Abdullah told the senators he appreciated U.S. aid for Jordan to deal with various regional challenges. The meeting focused on the fight against terrorism and efforts to achieve peace in the Middle East. King Abdullah emphasized the need to step up international and regional efforts to address the threat of terrorism and terrorist gangs. He also stressed the need to revive Palestinian-Israeli peace talks to bring about a just and comprehensive peace in the region. The king reiterated Jordan's stance towards regional conflicts, noting that the kingdom backed a political solution to the Syria crisis and efforts to stabilize Iraq, Yemen and Libya. McConnell and members of the U.S. Senate team voiced their appreciation for the positive steps pursued by Jordan. Prime Minister Abdullah Mansour is in Kuwait, heading Jordan's delegation to a meeting of donors on Syria, which opens tomorrow. During the third International Humanitarian Pledging Conference for Syria, the Jordanian delegation will present the kingdom's response plan for the Syria crisis and how to secure finances to carry it out. The plan aims to enhance the country's capacity to deal with the humanitarian and development needs of refugees, as well as the costs the government bears as a result of the Syrian crisis. Deputy Prime Minister and Minister of Foreign and Expatriate Affairs Nasser Judeh met his Luxembourg counterpart Jean Asselborn to discuss developments in the Middle East. The ministers focused on efforts to confront extremism and terrorism and agreed to intensify coordination in this regard. Talks also touched on the Palestine problem, with Judeh stressing that regional turmoil should not divert attention from the Palestinian cause, the core issue in the region. They also talked about the conflicts in Syria, Iraq and Yemen, where the ministers stressed the need to continue coordination to reach a political solution on these issues. Her Majesty Queen Rani Al Abdullah visited Tabaqat Fahl district in the northern Jordan Valley to highlight several success stories of small businesses run by women supported by the Community Centres Association in the area. The Queen met with several women residents there, including Yasmin and Ahmed. Both women are involved in small income-generating businesses and working hard to succeed despite the harsh living conditions. The Queen conveyed the King's greetings to the people of the area and expressed her pride as she listened to their success stories. She commended everyone's efforts and emphasized the importance of economic empowerment, considering it a tool for quality and positive change. Her Majesty concluded her visit to Tabaqat Fahl with a meeting with several women at the Pella Rest House. At the meeting, Ihab Saleh, the project coordinator in Tabaqat Fahl, also spoke and explained that the Community Centres Association trains women on how to manage small business, sustain and grow their startups. Investigators said that the German wing's co-pilot suspected of deliberately crashing a plane in the French Alps last week had been treated in the past for suicidal tendencies. The prosecutor told reporters in Dusseldorf, where the pilot lived and where the flight from Barcelona was heading, that several years ago, before obtaining his pilot's license, the co-pilot was in a long period of psychotherapeutic treatment with noticeable suicidal tendencies. The prosecutor added that since then he had not shown any sign of suicidal behavior nor aggressive tendencies towards others in visits to doctors.
We have not found anything in the surrounding, be it personal or his family or his professional surrounding, that is giving us any hints that enable us to say anything about his motivation. We have found medical documentation that show no organic medical illness.
We begin with sailing, a blow for the Volvo Ocean Race competitor Don Fenn race team, who broke its topmast 240 nautical miles west of Cape Horn, pulling them out from the current leg. Nobody was injured and there is no immediate danger to the crew after the incident, which took place in the final hours of the night. The crew reported that the mast broke above the third spreader, the top section of the mast, They're not planning to continue racing on this leg and are heading towards Argentina under their own sail. Rafael Nadal crashed out of the Miami Open in the third round, losing 6-4, 2-6, 6-3 to fellow Spaniard Fernando Verdasco. Verdasco, who's ranked 34th in the world, has now won his last two matches against world number 3 Nadal after the 14-time Grand Slam winner had won their previous 13 meetings. Nadal has never won in Miami, with his 11 attempts, his longest streak of attempts at a tournament without a victory. In another upset, 7th seed Stanislas Wawrinka lost 7-6, 7-6 to 28th seed Adrian Manarino. Britain's Andy Murray moved into the last 16 after beating Colombia's Santiago Giraldo 6-3, 6-4 to clinch his 499th win on the ATP Tour. Finally, a look at the weather forecast. Chilly in most areas tonight with low clouds and westerly brisk winds. Tomorrow, fair weather is forecast for much of the hilly areas, but warm across the Jordan Valley with a high of 29 degrees at the Dead Sea. There will be a chance for light rain, though, in the country's west in the evening hours, and in the south, the Port of Aqaba should expect some pleasant conditions tomorrow with northerly fresh winds and calm seas. Now, we'll look at temperatures forecast for tonight and tomorrow. To close our top stories once again, His Majesty the King honors a civil defense officer for his bravery in rescuing 2 Iraqi children swept away at the Dead Sea. Warplanes of the Saudi-led coalition continue striking Houthi targets in different parts of Yemen. And the foreign ministers of Iran and 6 world powers struggle in a final push for a preliminary nuclear accord less than 2 days before their deadline. And with this we come to the end of this edition of the news. My name is Rad Liptush. Thank you so much for your time. Have a good night.